We're live.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Newark Museum of Art. My name is Millicent Matthews. I'm the manager of traveling exhibitions here at the Newark Museum, and welcome to this iteration of Lunch and Learn. Today, we will be having an artful conversation with art historian and author Bridget Quinn. I just want to take a few seconds to allow those just joining us to stream in. We're also streaming live on Facebook Live today, and we are on Zoom as well. So if you have any questions after our conversation, we'll be taking on questions and answer segment. So you can put your questions in the question and answer area of Zoom, and you can place your questions in the comment section on Facebook. Okay, let's get started. Good afternoon. Welcome, Bridget, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
For this conversation. I just want to introduce you to the audience and do a bio for you. Bridget Quinn is the author of Broad Strokes, 15 Women Who Made Art and Art Made, I'm sorry, let me start that over. Bridget Quinn is the author of Broad Strokes, 15 Women Who Made Art and Made History, in that order. An Amazon pick for Best Art and Photography Book 2017, and a 2018 Amelia Bloomer List selection of recommended feminist literature from the American Library Association. Her most recent book is She Votes: How U.S. Women Won Suffrage and What Happened Next, a movement history that includes illustrations by 100 women artists. A graduate of the New York University Institute of Fine Arts and a regular contributor to online arts magazine, Hyperallergic. Bridget is a sought-after speaker on women and art. She's an avid sports enthusiast and an Iron Woman triathlete. And her narrative magazine essay, At Swim Two Girls, was included in the Best American Sports Writing 2013. She lives in the Bay Area with her family.
Thank you. Great to be here.
We're happy to have you. So we're going to be talking about 3 women artists that are profiled from your book, which we have in the Newark Museum collection. And they will be Edmonia Lewis, Mendita, and Cara Walker. So I just want to start out with a brief PowerPoint just to familiarize everyone with these artists and also their works, which we hold in our collection. Next slide, please. We're going to start with Edmonia Lewis. Edmonia Lewis was born in 1843 in Greenbush, now Rensselaer, New York. She died in 1907 near London, UK. The earliest internationally recognized woman sculptor of Native American, Ojibwa, and African American heritage, Edmonia Lewis led an extraordinary life. She was orphaned at a young age, and she was raised among her mother's bands of Ojibwa in upstate New York. Edmonia was fluent in Ojibwa and steeped in the progressive values of the abolitionist school she attended. Lewis made an early reputation as a sculptor of portrait, medallions, and busts of prominent abolitionists. In 1866, Edmonia Lewis moved to Rome and established a successful sculpture studio where her full-scale busts, portraits of Hiawatha and Minnehaha were widely admired. She found herself in the center of a flourishing expatriate and art colony that included some of the leading sculptors of her time. The image on view here, this object here, as mentioned, her bust of Hiawatha and Minnehaha. This is Hiawatha. We have both Hiawatha and Minnehaha in our collection. Can we go back? Thank you. This image of Hiawatha is the hero of an epic poem, The Song of Hiawatha, which was published by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow in 1955. The literary themes were common subjects for American neoclassic sculptors, and Lewis created several works inspired by Longfellow's popular poem, which was based on Ojibwa mythology. The poem celebrates the tragic marriage of the 2 young people from warring tribes. Hiawatha, a warrior, in the Ojibwe tribe is, of course, a in the story of several adventures. He met and fell in love with Minnehaha of the Dakota tribe. Realism and idealism are blended in Lewis's portrait sculptures, keeping with the dominant neoclassic style. Lewis gave her subjects generalized facial features that do not appear to be Native American. Their identity is only referenced by the feathers in their hair and the fur trimming of their clothing. Next slide, please. Our next artist is Ana Mendita. She was born in 1948 in Havana, Cuba, and she died in 1985 in New York City. Ana Mendita was a Cuban-American performance artist, sculptor, painter, video artist who is best known for her earth body artwork. Throughout the course of her career, Mendita created works in Cuba, Mexico, Italy, and the United States. Her works are somewhat autobiographical, drawing from her history of being displaced from her native Cuba, and focuses on themes including feminism, violence, life, death, identity, place, and belonging. Her works are generally associated with the four basic elements of nature. Mendita often focuses on a spiritual and physical connection with the earth. She felt that by uniting her body with the earth, she could become whole again. And during her lifetime, Mendita produced over 200 works of art using earth as a sculptural medium, and her techniques were mainly influenced by Afro-Cuban traditions. The image that is showing now is a photograph from a portfolio series of 6, which we possess in our collection. I selected this one because to me it most represented her connection to her body of work in like returning to the earth in a unique practice related to earthworks. Ana Mendita uses her body to explore and connect with the landscape, creating what she called earth body sculptures. She selected sites in nature and made impressions of her body using grass, dirt, sand, and fire. These photographs, which one is being reflected now, document a series of earth body sculptures that she created in Iowa in 1981. Mendita poured gunpowder on the ground around her own body and lit the gunpowder. The fire and small explosion marked the surrounding earth, creating abstract silhouettes. Inherently site-specific, intimate, and performance-based, these earth body sculpture works made Mendita an important figure within feminist and performance art movements of the 1970s. Next slide, please. Our next artist will be Cara Elizabeth Walker. She was born in 1969 in Stockton, California, and of our 3 women artists we're selecting today, she is the only living artist. Cara Elizabeth Walker is an American contemporary painter, silhouettist, printmaker, installation artist, and a filmmaker who explores race, gender, sexuality, and violence and identity in her work. She is best known for her room-sized tableau of black cut paper silhouettes. Walker's silhouette images work to bridge an unfinished folklore in the antebellum South, raising identity and gender issues for African American women in particular. Walker uses images from historical textbooks to show how enslaved African Americans were depicted during the antebellum South. The silhouettes were typically a genteel tradition in the American art history, and it was often used for family portraits, book illustrations. Walker carried on this portrait tradition, but used them to create characters in a nightmarish world, a world that reveals the brutality of American racism and inequality. The image on screen that we're showing now is also a work in our collection at the Newark Museum. This silhouette tableau of a woman, which was a female slave, who appears to have just thrown a baby into the air and is in the process of doing the same with another child, Another stands behind her, awaiting its turn. Another baby lies on the ground and appears to have died. A small black cloud wisp appears above him. The plantation owner stands to the right in a grief-stricken pose, whose coins pour out of his small sack. The narrative is both curious and disturbing and can be read in a various number of ways. Walker's work are rarely the simple narrative that they appear to be at first. Instead, they function as metaphors for large stories about slavery, racism, and stereotypes. The act of a woman carelessly flinging her child into thin air is a visual metaphor for slaves who had no choice but to give their children up for servitude. If the woman's act is a symbol for slavery itself, the baby who appears to have expired can be seen to signal the end of slavery. And we're going to have a conversation now about those three works. Bridget?
Well, I mean, it's so overwhelming to see them all at once because they all, like all works of art, they contain whole worlds within them, both the biography of the artist and their time and the works themselves. Since you went through them chronologically, maybe I can just talk a little bit about each artist and about the works themselves. And I'll start obviously with Edmonia Lewis. That's one of the stories. So I have been interested in women in the history of art since I was a teenager. So it's not a terribly long story, but too long for this conversation, but in the book. And Edmonia Lewis was one of the first artists I discovered for myself. Like, she wasn't in any mainstream textbooks. She had really been lost in a lot of ways. And in fact, her greatest, and I use this word advisedly, masterpiece, The Death of Cleopatra, had been lost for 100 years when I was a teenager. So I had not seen it or seen reproductions of it even. And now Edmonia Lewis is quite well known, not just by, art historians or art people, but in the broader culture. There have been children's books about her. And I think there was a Google Doodle for her a couple of years ago. Yes. So that's a really exciting thing to see. And it's just exciting to me that a place like the Newark Museum has one of her works. I noticed in the chat, someone mentioned the Detroit Institute of Arts. And I have actually seen those two works similar in Detroit, though I have not seen them at Newark. Let's see where to start with her. Well, first of all, what a remarkable life, an incredible person. As you mentioned, she was Black and Native. Her father was from Haiti, a freedman. Her mother was a Chippewa and raised in a traditional semi-nomadic community. And Edmonia grew up being called Wildfire, which suited her in many ways, and traveling with her mother's family. Because she was orphaned young, she and her younger brother Samuel were raised with her mother's people. And so she had, better than anyone probably in the 19th century, any artist, mainstream culture artist, in the Western tradition, a way of depicting Native life that no one else really could have done. And there's something for me kind of, I don't know, exciting, almost electric in seeing a Native woman depicting Native people, even through this neoclassical language, which you mentioned, it's not what we think of as traditionally Native appearance.
Yes.
But neither was Edmonia Lewis of traditionally Native appearance. We would say she was Black. Yes. She was definitely of both cultures. And at a time when it could not have been more difficult. So she's growing up semi-nomadic. Her younger brother actually ends up being, or was he younger or older? No, I can't remember. But he becomes really the person who makes her career happen. Oh, he must have been older because he goes to California, lives around San Francisco, and in the gold rush, and makes money and sends money back so that she can go to college. She ends up at Oberlin. And Oberlin is the first place of higher education in the United States where Blacks and whites and women and men were educated side by side. So, and run by abolitionists. which did not mean she had an easy time there. She had a very difficult time there. She was accused of poisoning her fellow students and was assaulted by vigilantes. I mean, it's an absolutely horrific story.
That just sounds horrific. She had a
Right?
hard time there. Yes,
She had a hard time, and that she came through it with so much just personal will is one of those, you know, thrilling stories of history, although extremely sad and horrible also. She left Oberlin as a result of actually being asked to leave. She was she was acquitted of poisoning. Then she was accused of stealing art supplies, was acquitted of that, but had to leave. And it's terrible. And yet, because of that, she was able to go to Boston, where she decided to become a sculptor. And she, with the help of some abolitionist leaders there, she was able to meet and work with quite a well-known sculptor whose name escapes me now, kind of minor person in our story. And she began doing busts of people like John Brown and Robert Gould Shaw, who was the leader of the Black Infantry in the Civil War. If you ever saw the movie Glory.
Yeah, Matthew Broderick played him,
yeah,
right?
Matthew Broderick, exactly. Yeah. And the thing about that is he was from this Boston Brahmin family, so money, they sold well is the point. These were images that were beloved of abolitionists, and with that money she immediately left the United States, and understandably so, right? She said, right, these shores have no room for a colored sculptor, and she went to Europe in general and eventually settled in Rome. And Millicent, tell me if I'm going on too long about her biography, but I'm just like so into her story.
It is. I love her story. I just love the fortitude that, you know, she was able to, you know, just make it through all these issues and problems that she had, but still had the strength to, you know, to pursue her art.
Right. And
go to Rome.
I know, and like, oh, I'll just go to another country. Like, imagine being a single woman in the 19th century and Black and just going abroad. Like, I'm going to go make it happen. And she did. I mean, for me, also, the part of her story I find amazing is that she sees a sculpture, a public sculpture, and says, that's what I want to do, and does it. Like, that trips me out.
Yeah.
So anyway, she goes to Rome and she joins this expatriate community, a lot of Americans, but some British and Irish women also, a group of mostly lesbian artists in Rome, which we don't necessarily think of as happening, but it very much did. And Rome is, of course, the perfect place to be a sculptor because there's lots of marble, there's lots of stonemasons, there's this tradition of art that you can look to. And neoclassical art is the sort of the most beloved art form, mainstream of Western art. So it's no surprise that she's making art in the neoclassical vein. That is the art of her time. And I say that because, you know, Henry James said some not very nice things about Edmonia Lewis because she was a Black sculptor working with white materials. And really, that was the language of high art. And those white materials are not meant to reflect the white race either. That's a misconception that has unfortunately been taken over by white supremacists in the United States in the last few years as well. It was just an artistic medium. What else do I want to say about her? Oh, Longfellow, that Longfellow poem that you have the two busts of, Hiawatha and Minnehaha, that was from a poem that was probably the most popular English language poem of the 19th century. And so, I mean, what would be an example? I don't know, like, I mean, poets in the 19th century were like movie stars today, right?
Yes,
they were, right, they're huge figures. Longfellow was so, he had heard and maybe seen in reproduction these works, and he went and visited her when he was on the Grand Tour in Rome. And her atelier was a place that many famous 19th century figures visited, including Frederick Douglass when he was there on his honeymoon. But Longfellow came and sat for her. She did a bust of him as well. So, you know, she was someone who is not just like this interesting footnote in history, like that we can tease out, but, you know, a major American artist abroad. It's a really thrilling story. And the story of the rediscovery of the death of Cleopatra is one of the greatest art history.
Yes, I wanted to come to that because
Yeah.
that's just incredible that, you know, it was found, 100 years later, just tucked away in
In a
a
mall.
storage closet in a mall.
I know.
And just to see an image of that work, I
Yeah.
would love to see it in person. It's incredible. And the time that it took, like it took her several years to sculpt that.
Well, it's several tons, first of all.
Yes.
And an interesting thing when you say that it took her several years to sculpt is that traditionally, and this is still true today, as I'm sure you know, sculptures are done by artisans. Like the artist conceives of the work and hires craftspeople to work on the work.
She
And
did.
that she didn't. And probably for two reasons. One is it was very expensive, but two, and this had happened to women who were part of this expatriate group before, they were accused of not making the works themselves. And then that's a trope that all women in history have, that they didn't really make it. But she knew that as a Black, Native, and woman artist, there couldn't be any hint of scandal around her work or any hint of claim that she was not the author. So it's even more amazing when you think of that. So yeah, it was lost for 100 years. And I think the best part of that story to me is that it was rediscovered thanks to an independent scholar who just wouldn't let it go, like tracked it down, and then found it. And if you do want to see it, you can go to the Smithsonian. It's there.
We'll do when we're all able to. Yeah.
I was gonna say, it might not be open. Oops.
Definitely.
So, and I've noticed questions coming in, but we'll wait till the end, right?
Yeah, you're going to wait till the end. So we're going to move on to Anna.
Yeah, let's talk about Anna Mendita, but also an incredible story and even more tragic story. I actually, I just want to say, Edmonia Lewis's story is not tragic at all. She lived a long life. She was famous. Great story.
During her own lifetime, she was famous. So that's
absolutely right. Yeah. Not just rediscovered, not living into old age. She had a rich life. One thing I want to say about her brother, he ended up moving to Montana, which is where I'm from. And he became one of the most wealthy citizens of Bozeman, Montana. And his home is a historic landmark.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so interesting.
Cool.
So Anna Mendita.
With Anna, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
I have to say, I love her work, but I really wasn't familiar with her. And sadly, my familiarization to Anna was news reports of her murder, just like as you mentioned in the book. So that's how I came to understand her and just was intrigued and learned about her and her style and her earthworks and the meaning behind it and everything at that time, sadly. But,
right. I think, to me, I mean, on the one hand, I want to hold apart her work from her end, because it deserves to be looked at apart from that. And at the same time, it's almost impossible to see her work now without knowing that. So I maybe should just start with that she was, in my opinion, likely murdered. He was acquitted. So she was married to the sculptor Carl Andre, who was and is a extremely revered minimalist sculptor, many years her senior. And in 1985, they'd only been married, I think, 8 months. There was a fight, and we know this because of witnesses heard a fight, and then she fell out, I think, 30-some story window that was kind of high up. I mean, kind of high up in the room. So not you couldn't just trip and fall out of it, is what I'm saying. So but this is very controversial. But what is fact for certain is controversial about what happened. What is fact for certain is that she had just recently said that she wanted to live to be. She had recently told a friend right before her death she wanted to live to be in her 80s. She was going to give up smoking and drinking, which she did not do. She was drinking that night. Because women artists weren't recognized until they were old. And so she wanted to be sure to live long enough to find recognition, and she did not. She died in her 30s. She came to the United States, I believe she was 12 or 13 years old, in Operation Peter Pan, when the US government and the Catholic Church took young people, not orphans, children, who were willingly sent by their families, I think, for the most part, to the United States to escape communist Cuba. And she and her older sister came in, I think, 1950, and ended up in Iowa, which, can you imagine, like going from Havana to
that
Iowa?
had to be such a culture shock for them.
Right. And you know, to be women of color in a place where it was probably in the 50s in Iowa, extremely white. They were put in reform school just because they didn't know what to do with them. And of course, it was very difficult. She discovers art. She begins to, she gets both a BA and an MA in Iowa in art. And it's there already as a young woman that she begins the Silhouette series that is in your the photographs are in your collection. And she did that series for at least 10 years, or up to almost 10 years, in many different forms, sometimes carving out the earth, sometimes putting her own body and doing a sort of a, I mean, I think in the book I say like a crime scene, you know, like where they do the tape around, an outline of her body. And sometimes like digging into it, sometimes lighting gunpowder on fire and burning it, sometimes having blood, sometimes planting flowers or covering her body in flowers. I mean, there's many, many different ways she uses the silhouette. And it is all, according to her, about reuniting with the earth and the forces of the earth. And I think that's partly what makes it so moving, is that it's not spectacle. There's something really, I don't know, you feel it, you feel the sort of world history of it. And it's impossible not to think about these Neolithic goddesses that were made out of the earth, and the great goddess of the Neolithic. And she was definitely aware of that. And gunpowder, blood, all of these things come from Santeria and Afro-Cuban spiritual traditions. And there's definitely this feeling of kind of shamanism. Yes, the silhouettes, but also the photographs that you have, you know, they're not just documentation, like they are artworks themselves. Like they're beautifully made. And I think also just to say, you know, she's part of this tradition that was really beginning of earthworks in American art and American sculpture. But instead of, like, when we think of earthworks, I think we mostly think of like the spiral jetty, like this giant, you know, I think of it as kind of masculine, like moving tons of earth and changing the face of the, or double negative, like changing the face of the planet by the will of human endeavor. And they can be very beautiful for that reason too, the same way Stonehenge or something could be very beautiful. But her works are body sized, and there's something humanizing and something that does feel connected to the feminine about that. And she self-consciously was working with the feminine as a traditional and spiritual, I don't know, magic in the world, maybe. And, you know, it's interesting just that you have silhouettes, and then to talk about Cara Walker, because she uses the silhouette. Yes. And I, you know, those works are Walker does both these silhouettes, she does films, sculptures. She just had a major piece at the Tate Modern, the Fons Americana, that's about the slave trade. And it, like the piece in your collection, what is so unsettling for me about her work is, well, first of all, they're very big. Like you enter, like those are life size, and you enter a room where it's really filling the room. And so you're kind of like implicated in the scene. You're sort of the same way we're implicated by history, you're in it. And one of the things you said about the man in the picture who looks to be grieving, I thought, but it's even in a silhouette, you can see it's fake grief, right? He's like, oh, I feel so bad. And there's my money. The money was important. Right. It's and that's what's so unsettling about her art, I think, and maybe especially for white viewers, is that it's so beautiful and so lovely and charming the way a lot of 18th century painting is, and 19th century silhouettes you mentioned were about gentility, like they were sort of sweet domestic art, and yet these really horrific things are being depicted. And for that reason, she's been very controversial as an artist, and the things she depicts and the way she sort of makes us all grapple with history in a way that is super uncomfortable, especially because it's pleasant in a certain way in her work.
It's to the eye. It's pleasant to the eye in the silhouette's form, but in a way, it kind of just, it forces you to have to dig a little deeper to realize what's actually going on there.
Right. What's actually going on, and isn't that how we live our lives, right? Like, I like what I'm wearing, but it was cheap and it was made by child labor somewhere, maybe. Like, you know,
sweat.
Right. It's terrible. It's so it does that in a very immediate and sometimes overwhelming way, I think.
And I kind of correlate her back to Cara's work, back to Edmonia in the sense of sculpture with her sugar baby.
Oh my God!
Made of sugar. Yes.
Did you see it?
Yes, I had.
I did not see
fortune of seeing it. It was phenomenal.
Amazing. So, the sugar baby, for those who don't know, was, I mean, I don't know, like how big, like, but like it's a kind of sphinx, like sphinx size, in the old Domino sugar factory in Brooklyn. And just, I mean, even images of it, even films, even photographs, it is, I think I say in the book, you could write a whole dissertation about that one.
You could, just that one work.
Yeah. All right. I mean, I don't know what now.
I think we'll
talk more.
Do you have anything else you want to elaborate on?
No, I mean, I'd kind of like to hear what people have to say. Yeah.
Okay, because we have quite a few already.
Okay, awesome.
Okay, let me start. Our first question is from Anonymous. Well, they also mentioned that they also have Cara Walker in Detroit.
Yep.
Another anonymous question is, how did Edmonia have the money to do this traveling?
By selling her art. So she was a professional artist quite early in her career. Originally, she got her training thanks to her brother helping to fund her education, as well as abolitionists at Oberlin. And she did have some kind of like artistic stipends from abolitionists in Boston, which was complicated, like it always is with patrons, right? Like, you know, these nice ladies giving her money then wanted her to make work that they liked, that didn't rock the boat maybe in a way they thought it shouldn't, or etc. So to really be free, she needed to go to Europe. And she funds that herself by the sale of these busts of people like John Brown. And once she gets to Rome, one of the first works she makes is a piece called Forever Free. She made many works with the theme of freedom, and both in American history and in traditional history, like Hagar in the Wilderness.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is from Elsa Nazario. She says, did Lewis use Carré marble for any of her works?
I'm sure she did, because she was in Italy, but I do not know for certain. And I actually don't know if it says in your...
I believe it says marble.
Just marble, yeah. I would imagine she did, but I don't know, I'm sorry.
Let me double check. Sorry.
I just have marble, yeah.
Yeah, it's just marble. Okay, thank you for that question. Our next question is Joy Moody. Where is or who has the largest collection of Edmonia Lewis's work?
Well, I think it's the Smithsonian. Much of her work has been lost. That's worth saying. And that's worth saying partly because I'll bet it's still out there.
I'm sure.
So it would be very fun to find. And things keep reappearing now that her legacy is better known. For example, a photograph of her that had never been seen before, wearing like one of those great 19th century white dresses, with like the fitted wasp waist,
Mhm.
reappeared just a few years ago. Her grave was just rediscovered. Marilyn Richardson, who was the scholar who discovered the Cleopatra, also discovered her grave outside of London. And so I guess I'm digressing from your question. I'm sorry.
It's quite all right.
So
That's just more info.
she was working in London. She was working in Rome. She came out to San Francisco at one point. She had a major show in Pennsylvania. So it's possible that there's works all around. We know for sure she became a Catholic and did work for churches in Italy.
Mm.
And so I would imagine, and I would be certain, in fact, that there are works by her that we just don't know where they are.
Yeah.
But there's also major works that are lost. So for example, there are several of the busts of Hiawatha and Minnehaha that you have are probably studies for bigger figurative works with figures. And I think there were 3 or 4 of the three of those were done, and only one is known, or is still around. But the Smithsonian has Cleopatra, it has Hagar in the Wilderness, and it also has busts like you have.
Cool. Thank you. The next question is from Alex. Are any of her sculptures at the home in Montana, her brother's home?
No, they aren't. They are not. Too bad. Because she, one of the things that's great, she has a piece called Indian Combat. I think it's in Cleveland, but it fits kind of nicely with Montana art. It would be nice to have it there.
Cool. Thank you. The next question or statement is from Janet Mandel. She says, "Not all earthworks are masculine. Think Maya Lin."
Completely agree. Maya Lin, Jenny Holzer. I mean, yeah, I completely agree with you.
Thank you. Our next comment is from Mary Del Negro. I saw Cara Walker's exhibit at the Montclair Art Museum a few years ago, the first time I heard about her. Thank you, Mary.
New Jersey's had a lot of Cara Walker sort of experiences. I know at the Newark Public Library, they have a work there that created a lot of controversy. It was covered for a time and then uncovered again.
I remember that work. I got to see it up close, and I also got to attend the lecture that they had a whole discussion about it, and she came and spoke about it. So
it's really brave of her to come and speak, I think.
It was a really nice event. It was a nice event.
That's great.
All right, the next one is from Heather. Did Cara Walker have an exhibit at the Montclair Museum about 2 years ago? Around that time or so, yeah, that did happen. Our next question is again from Janet Mandel. What other women artists do you talk about in broad strokes?
So it's 15 women, because my first art history textbook, which was like 800 pages on the history of art, was mostly Western and had 16 women in it. So it's a very small number, but it begins with Artemisia Gentileschi, who is also sort of newly very renowned. And believe it or not, just 3 or 4 years ago when Broad Strokes came out, was not. She just had a show, or it might still be up at the National Gallery in London. So, and Judith Leister.
Can you go through the list of
Sure.
the female artists everyone will know?
Oh, I sure will. So Artemisia Gentileschi, Italian Baroque, Judith Leister, who is the Dutch Golden Age, Adélaïde Labiguière, who I am writing a biography of right now, who was a French painter during the French Revolution, who lived the revolution, which is a miracle, and stood up for the rights of women and women artists in particular. Marie-Denise Villers, who has a very famous painting at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Rosa Bonheur, probably the most famous woman artist of the 19th century. Edmonia Lewis, Paula Modersohn Becker, who was a German modernist. Vanessa Bell, who was the sister of Virginia Woolf. Alice Neal, who also has a New Jersey connection, I believe, the 20th century portraitist. Lee Krasner, who was an expressionist painter. Louise Bourgeois, French-American sculptor and artist. Ruth Asawa, who is very beloved on the West Coast, and I think less well known there, Japanese-American sculptor. Anna Mendita and Cara Walker, and Susan O'Malley, who is more contemporary, like Cara Walker.
Great. Thank you so much. I have to say, I thoroughly enjoyed the book. I loved your anecdotes and your interjection of your, introduction to certain things in your time, in school. What I found interesting was that a quote that you had by Virginia Woolf that, like, throughout history, anonymous was most likely a woman, which which I thought so many things are attributed to anonymous. And I just really thought it was fascinating, like how all these, women artists, even going back to Artemisia, were tied to artists or came from an artistic family, or there was always, this anchor artist male, usually the father or the husband, that
absolutely
may not even have been as talented as they were, but they were sort of, in the background.
I mean, Artemisia Gentileschi is a great example of that, right? Her father, Orazio, was the well-known figure, and her work was sort of slid into his.
Yeah.
And now I think it's fairly consensus that her work is stronger, and certainly there's more interest in her work now.
Or how you always know the male, or like Andre.
But it even helps now. Cara Walker's dad, Larry Walker, she was raised with an artist father. It helps. It definitely gives you, and father or mother, she won the MacArthur Genius Grant. I think she was 27.
Yeah, very young. Incredible. Yeah. So and being tied, to these males was like really something, because the male artist, the husband or the father. Say in my example, I had always heard of Jackson Pollock,
right?
But I didn't really know much about Lee Krasner until I took a visit to the Whitney when I was young and saw a work of hers. I think it was The Seasons, and I was just so spellbound by that piece. It made me think about your correlation to Madame Guillard, where I just wanted to just be there and see that. And it just made me really delve into, everything about Lee, and then discovering, she was an artist much longer than Jackson, and she was really mostly
and the key to his success,
promoting him. It's incredible.
I had a very similar experience with Lee Krasner, which is in the book, but I mean, in reproduction, but just being like, wait a second, what? I mean, I feel like it's hard to think about now when women have gotten so much visibility in art, how there were none. There were none. And we're not that old. But even with that, the disparity is still extreme.
Still, it's still to this day. It's still the same, even from ancient times. We have a couple more questions I want to get to. Elsa Nazario says, if you had the choice of reading the book or listening to the audio, I would read the pictures for the picture. I would read the picture for the pictures. The illustrations are really great of the female artists in the book. We have a statement from Amy. Ruth Asawa is at the National Museum of Women in the Arts.
Yes.
And has a new series of U.S. stamps of her
correct
work.
And they're gorgeous. Gorgeous.
And we have a couple more. How would you start your research on an artist, and how do you choose who to write about? That's from Amy Krasner.
So researching this book was not difficult, in part because for 30 years I'd been gathering information on these artists. Because I'd had this sort of youthful obsession with women artists, I had, through my undergraduate and graduate career, constantly looked for work that interested me, women whose work who interested me. So I built a very large library, and had spent years sort of becoming maybe even overly attached to some artists. And that's really who's in the book. I mean, the women I chose for the book, I chose because they represented specific times in Western art that they could sort of show as an example of the artwork of that time, but also women who I had a kind of relationship with across time. So for me, the research had been happening over a very long period of time. But after that, I just read everything I can and go to wherever it is I can see the work in person. Right now, that's hard. I'm writing a book right now. And on Adelaide Lebiguiar, whose work is mostly, not entirely, in France. But wherever it is, you can't see it in person right now, or almost nowhere.
Okay, I'm going to take one more. We do have a few more, and I want to thank everyone for submitting such great questions and comments. But we've come to the end of our program. I'm going to, well, there's one more statement from an anonymous person. It says there will be an Artemisia exhibition in Detroit in 2022.
Fantastic. Detroit also has an amazing Artemisia painting, one of the best. So a good place to have an Artemisia show. I will be there.
Okay, I'll take two more. We also have another anonymous. Could you trace the story about discovering Cleopatra? Unfortunately, we can't today, but if
it's in the book, it's fantastic.
You get the book, it's in the book. It's a fantastic story. It's a fantastic story. Another comment is from Lori. It says artist June Leaf was overshadowed by her spouse, Robert Frank.
I mean, it's a story as old as time, truly.
Yeah.
Truly. And many of these women are, you know, their work and their stories are being uncovered, but there is so much work to be done. Everyone dig in.
Definitely. Well, I just really want to thank you so much, Bridget. I've enjoyed our conversation. As always, I always wish we have more time. But
same. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Maybe we'll get to do it again sometime. And
so.
I just want to give an update of our next program, which will be our Community Day, and it'll be our holiday celebration. It will be held on Saturday, December 12th. So please join us as we journey around the world. This holiday season, you'll get to explore music, performance, and traditions from cultures across the continents. All are invited for this joyful celebration of holidays. Please check out our website to sign up for the day's events, or you can follow us along on Facebook Live. And I just want to thank you again, Bridget, for joining us. It's been a pleasure. And I want to thank also my co-workers and staff members at the New York Museum who assisted with the research and images, and the people in the background who make all this happen. And I want to thank you all today for joining us. We really loved the engagement that we had, and have a wonderful remainder of your day.
Thank you, everyone. I really enjoyed, I read all the comments also. I just want everyone to know, and thank you so much for the kind comments and the wishes and the great questions.
Oh, thank you. Thank you all. Have a wonderful day. Stay safe. And
thanks. Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Bridget. Bye.